Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Direct Edition, a podcast about whatever the fuck I want it to be, because I'm your host, Dave, and I don't have any idea what I'm doing. Today, I'm bringing you my interview with Jim Mahfood. You may not know Jim, but you've probably seen his artwork if you're a comics fan, or if you're just an art fan. He is as I like to call him, a madman with a brush. I first became aware of his art, some point about a decade ago. I was just digging around at a Half Price Books and I found one of his self-published books and I just scooped it up. I like the art style and I think I was familiar with his art from some Marvel stuff that he had done in the 90s, but it was a subconscious thing. I didn't follow his art career closely, but I followed him on Instagram and I met him a couple times. He was super nice. And then we met at OAX and I talked to him for about a half hour. He had also been on Cartoonist Kayfabe a bunch of times, so I was familiar with the kind of person he was, and he was the type of person I like to talk to. Big music fan, and just all wild art influenced by all the right people in my eyes. And so we had a really nice chat, and I hope that you enjoy it. But before you do, I've actually created a 27-song playlist that comprises of every band and musician that is mentioned in this podcast, including some of the albums specifically that Jim mentions. It's called Food One Davengers, and that is me and Jim. And I created this playlist for Spotify. It may be on YouTube too, but unfortunately I can't put it on every streaming platform just due to the nature of streaming platforms. And so just know that if you subscribe to or review this, it really helps this. And if you can spread the word and get another person to subscribe, then, I'm going to grow and going to be mega podcaster. Anyway, without further ado, enjoy my chat with Jim Mahfood. I bring to you a special guest today, somebody that I actually met at OAX. You might know him from his creator-owned project called Girl Scouts, also working on Kevin Smith's Clerks and his art books, which are fantastic. He is a madman, a scientist with a brush, and I'm going to present to you Jim Mahfood. Hey, what's going on, Jim?
What's up, Dave? Thank you for the introduction, and I'm glad to see that you have the massive hardcover visual funk. That's still one of my proudest publications. I'm still happy with that book.
It's fantastic. It's part of a line of just art books that exist in the early 2000s, late 90s, even into these days, that is not your standard thing, because there's like first page does not look like the second, does not like the third, fourth, fifth, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And we plan that one so that it's divided into sections of like, here's illustration work, here's sketchbook work, here's some of my Tank Girl stuff. And my friend Carmen Acosta, shout out to her, she designed the book and did just an incredible job.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Is this still in print? I imagine it's not, or is it?
That's a good question. You can still find it online. IDW published it. I think it came out in like 2010.
I think that's correct.
But I'm actually working on like I want to do basically a sequel to that book where I have a nice new coffee table hardcover art book because I produce so much work that I need another collection.
Yeah, we need it. That means we need another collection too.
Yes.
So, it is a fantastic book. And if you can track it down, please do, because it's just a treat to look through. I mean, everything right from illustration to painting on women.
Yes.
So,
the body paint sessions.
Yeah. We will get to that. I just want to say also, by the way, I don't know how you're feeling, but I'm feeling a little OAX withdrawal. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. It was I didn't know what to expect. And it was a blast, and it was kind of like more art than I was expecting.
Yeah.
In a good way. Like, shout out to Bill Cox and Kasra. Those guys rocked it, made all of us artists, all the guests feel welcome. Professionally run and so convenient that we could just walk down from our hotel room and be at the convention in 2 minutes. Like, that's really rare to have that.
That is true. I used to, I spent 12 years working in the events industry, and the best events were the ones where I flew in and stayed at the hotel of the event that I was, like I didn't have to leave. And from a perspective of somebody that was attending, because I am no artist, but one of the most comfortable conventions I've ever been to, and the fact that you could have a conversation with everybody and not have to talk above other people, it felt like the Comic-Cons that we went to when we were growing up.
Yeah. It's funny, man. I watched your recap video and because I was stuck at my own table, running my own table, obviously.
Yeah.
There's so much that I missed that I'm glad I got to see it through your video. But at the same time, I was like, oh shit, I should have checked that out. Or I didn't realize that such and such guy was selling these pages or whatever. It was kind of overwhelming, like the amount of original art that was happening.
Yeah, it was. And next year, I know kind of like to spread out my time a little more, but it was fantastic. I got to talk. We spoke for about a half hour, and I got to speak to so many people and meet people that I never met, and then obviously drool on some art and purchase some art.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for buying some stuff from me.
Oh yeah. And I'll show that off real quick. That was the Grog Mignola Kirby Mahfood piece.
Yes.
And this is fantastic. And we were talking about Zipatone, and like I said, not an artist, but watching kayfabe for 3.5 years, I'm starting to understand process a lot more. And I thought that was really cool that you still use cut your own Zipatone and all that.
The hand-done Zipatone thing has become almost like this fetishistic thing in with certain artists where it's like, where'd you get that Zipatone, that pattern? It's like trying to find some illegal drugs or something. It's like, I got a supplier. I know a guy. I got lucky, man, because when I was a kid, I started buying Zipatone at any art store I went to that had it. And then I would find art stores that were going out of business or whatever and call them and make the trip to, if they had Letraset or Zipatone, Chart Pack, whatever you want to call it. And I would just say, save me your entire stash. Like I'm coming to buy it. So I have some stuff that I've had for like 25 years. And then, Ed Piskor went to Japan in 2019 and started posting about this famous 4-story tall art store in Tokyo. And every one of us has gone to that store now. And I walked out of there with like a stack of zip. I spent like $500 or something crazy.
Wow. But it was probably cheap comparative.
Yeah. And the people working there were like, wow, you really like this stuff. It's like, well, I can't get this. I can't get a lot of this in America.
Right. What? It's very interesting. And I do want to talk about Japan, but I guess we can right now. The art supply stuff is one thing. And then why does that culture still have a Tower Records? Like they're holding on to all the things that we got rid of. And I love that.
Yeah. The Tower, I went to that as well. And that was kind of like a blast of pure Americana, but filtered through the wonderful Japanese lens. And I found a lot of the stuff in their country was that it was like, they're so great at sampling all these little bits of other culture and American culture, obviously with music, rock and roll, comics, toys, animation, but they put such a unique and distinct spin on everything that it turns into this like mind-bending experience. Because I'd never been there, man. I went in 2019 for Tokyo Comic-Con, and it to me it was sort of like a life-changing experience where being in the country and walking around, I was like, okay, so everything in this country revolves around brilliant, well thought out design, imagination, creativity, and just being completely bugged out and weird and unique. And the influence it had on me was like, oh, I am already kind of a weirdo outsider artist. That's okay. Like I can be even weirder if I want. I can do anything I want. I can write and draw whatever comics I want. I can interpret things the way I want to interpret them. And it kind of fed it, like reestablished my belief almost in you can follow a unique path if you want to.
Yeah. That's a great way to look at it. I haven't been there yet. I've been talking to Ed and also Sean, Japan Book Hunter, who I had on the channel. And he's like, dude, come out here. He's like, you can come hunting with me. I'll show you what I do. I'm like, man, this is really tempting to fly out there at the end of the year. And then, I mean, it's, and their culture has had so much, American culture and then Japanese culture are kind of symbiotic. Like they both have influenced each other so much. And at this point, I'm like, yeah, all right. I'm down to really dive into this and learn about it a lot more. Especially because their love of comics, it's like baseball for Americans is comics for Japanese people. That's the only thing I could think of.
Yeah. It was awesome, man. I stayed for almost a month and I got to really dig into the history of manga, and Ed, our buddy Aki, who's friends with Ed, who acts as an interpreter for most of the Americans that visit during Tokyo Comic-Con. He went out of his way where there was like several days in a row where he would just meet me in the afternoon, take me to all the comic and manga spots and show me and talk to me about the actual history of how it all came about.
That's amazing.
So it became almost like a research trip for me. But again, for me, it was like, this is so interesting and fascinating that when am I ever going to have a chance to do this again? So I just turned it into this like crazy research trip, basically.
And that's an interesting thing. Now you're giving me ideas because I've been to Scotland 4 times and it's my favorite country on the face of the planet. And got a couple of friends that are comics people from Scotland, and it's like the rich history of the UK in general, obviously something that you're familiar with. We'll talk about it in a bit, but there needs to be some more of that because it's just going to help keep comics alive for many people, like creators going to other countries to learn and then bringing pieces back. But even like, I'll take some responsibility as someone that loves comics history. I want to bring it to people in a way that they can digest. And it's me going there and exploring it. It's like, I'm not calling myself a documentarian, but I'm David Attenborough by first name. I don't know.
Well, you act as an ambassador. And that's the thing too about being invited to these shows. Anytime I'm invited internationally, it's like you become sort of an ambassador in a way. And I'm just always flattered that people would want to bring me out in the first place. And then to be able to share the culture, talk about it, you're instantly breaking the ice with people that would be strangers through this very specific shared interest and love of a really great art form. I think that's been one of my main connections with people throughout my adult life, man. It's just connecting through art and music and maybe love of movies, but specifically the comic book thing. That's what allows me to get invited and travel to all these places I wouldn't have imagined I would be able to go to. And that's just been a kick-ass side effect of the career, basically.
I mean, it's very true. All the things you name, music, movies, and art, and comics, it's the one thing that connects us that doesn't really, for the most part, it pushes away the things that disconnect us, like politics, religion, social political issues where everybody's got their own stances. But art is one of those things, like when you connect with somebody, it just destroys all those boundaries.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's crazy. You can just connect with someone instantly over your love of like Jack Kirby.
Yeah. Or Trent Reznor or, whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
So you grew up, I know you grew up in St. Louis and moved to Kansas City when you were around 18, like after high school. But what, to your best of your recollection, what was your first experience with comics and also a comic store?
Oh, yeah. I would go with my mom to the local supermarket every Friday to do the grocery shopping for the family. And I discovered comic books that way. And specifically, I discovered My mom took me and my older sister and a couple of our friends to see Raiders of the Lost Ark in the theater when it came out in like 81, I believe.
I think that sounds right.
81, 82 or 80. So we were probably too young to watch this movie, but the movie completely blew my mind. And I was in the grocery store with my mom and I saw the Further Adventures of Indiana Jones comic book published by Marvel. And they were on, this was like 83, I believe. They were on issue like 6 or 7. So I flipped out and my mom bought me the book. And then inside the book, I saw like, oh, Marvel also publishes Spider-Man. You know, I knew what Spider-Man was from watching him on the Electric Company and the old 60s Spider-Man reruns. The cartoons were on TV. So as soon as I went down that wormhole, man, I became a instant Marvel fanatic as a kid. And my first comic shop experience was probably like 86 because I went into this comic shop in St. Louis called Bob's Comics. Very, very small hole in the wall type joint. But I specifically remember Dark Knight Returns issue 2 was on the shelf. Yeah. So, and seeing that book blew my mind because it was a different format. It was like the prestige format. It was very expensive. It's like $4 for the one book. And the idea that, oh, okay, comics aren't just the newsprint floppy 75-cent books that I get at the grocery store. There's this whole other world now. And there's black and white comics, and there's indie, and there's Cerebus, and there's Ninja Turtles. And that, dude, to me, like, as soon as I discovered that world of the comic shop specifically, that was what made me a full-blown, like, addict, basically. And my mom would bring me maybe once a month, but, you know, she'd drop me off and be like, you got like 20 minutes. And I would just run in the shop and be going crazy over like what to figure out to spend. You know, I had maybe $2 each time I went in. So it's like, but at the time you could buy 3 books for $2 or so. So, yeah, you know, I had decisions that I could make and it was very, very exciting, you know?
Yeah. Even so, I mean, you might have even had a chance to buy 10 books if there were a 10-cent bin or something like that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. But I don't remember. There was probably like 50-cent comics and stuff, but in St. Louis too, my dad discovered that like quarterly, there was this very small comic swap meet show at this kind of like Shriners Hall in downtown St. Louis.
Oh, wow.
So like 4 times a year, my old man would take me to that. It was a Sunday event only. And it was just guys with folding tables set up selling comics. And that was another one of like, my dad would give me like $20 and be like, I'm going to hang out outside and smoke a cigarette. You got like an hour. And I would run around the room and just see who had like back issues of G.I. Joe or Ninja Turtles or, you know, whatever I was into. But yeah, man, it was just such a exciting thing to discover at a young age. And it just always stayed with me. And I think it's a particular type of person that is instantly attracted to this format of drawings on paper in these little panels that tell a story. Yeah. Because I tried to convert my friends as soon as I was like 10 years old. Would I like get them to become comic book fans? Some of them did, but others just didn't get it. Like there's just certain people, you show them a comic book and they're like, yeah, not for me. I don't know. I like the movies. I like the Marvel shows or whatever. And it's like, I get it. Everyone's different. But for me, and I'm sure, I mean, I assume you agree as well, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, this is for me. This is my thing, man. Yeah.
Yeah. Instantly. I mean, I wish I was buying books in 86, but I think 88, 89 was when my mom first took me to the store that was local to me, but it was the first ongoing Wolverine, the Buscema Claremont, and I was done. That day I was like, I'm done. I don't care about any other type of reading. This is what I want.
Yeah.
and it stuck with me. And it, when I assume like most kids, you know, you doodled all over the place and stuff, but where in your childhood did you decide, oh, I'm going to start making a comic? Like, not, I want to be a comic book artist, but like, did you make a comic early on as a kid?
I did. I started making, and I still have a bunch of them, but I started making my own Spider-Man comics on loose leaf lined paper. And my dad had the brilliant idea of he brought one of these 5-page issues that I made. He brought it to his office and actually made photocopies of it.
Oh, nice.
And I started giving them out to the neighborhood friends of mine. But the first day he came home and I saw my work reproduced for the first time ever, that concept also blew my mind, because it was like, wait a minute. Okay, this is how it's all done. There's these artists, they make the art, they make the work, it's mass produced. It just didn't really click with me because I was a little kid, but
yeah, you don't know how things are made.
Yeah. So seeing my own work reproduced, I was like, oh, this is what I want. I want this on a massive scale or whatever. So, but yeah, I mean, it was the thing of like always drawing, always trying to get better. And I think in like 7th or 8th grade, people in my school started telling me that I was good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I started standing out as like the art kid in my class, and people started asking for drawings. And I think I started trading things for drawings. Like, I'll do a drawing for you if you give me these Garbage Pail Kids, or this comic book, or this, what else were we into? A dub of baseball cards, or a dub of a cassette tape. Like, let me borrow that tape. Or these are all just quintessential like mid 80s things. Like,
oh, of course they are. I mean, tapes were currency. I mean, legit currency. So alternatively that, because I want to do this thing with two paths, because you're a big music guy, and music and your art are, you know, they're intertwined. In those period of high school, or do you remember like the first band or album that was yours? Like, we have our parents' music, but the first band I discovered was Guns N' Roses when Appetite came out.
Oh yeah.
So is there something that like you can look at and be like, yeah, this album that I found around this time kind of influenced my art all the way going forward?
Yeah. I mean, I was at the prime age of like discovering hip hop when it was new.
Yeah.
And me and my friends were completely blown away by Run DMC when they first hit, when Walk This Way hit with Aerosmith, the King of Rock cassette tape. And then shortly after that was Beastie Boys' License to Ill. And I mean, dude, that's the first album I went out and bought with my own money on cassette tape. Like, I remember the day I walked into, it was at Target of all places, but they had like a display in the music section. And you know, my mom was like, are you sure you want to spend, this is a lot of money for you. This is like $10 whole or whatever a cassette cost. And that was, I was in 6th grade at the time. We had just started skateboarding, but that was me and my homies. That was our thing. Beastie Boys, skateboarding, comic books. That was the first thing that I really latched onto. And I got lucky because my folks were both record collectors and music people. So my mom was a stay-at-home mom and was always playing everything from hard rock, Steppenwolf, to James Brown, to the Bee Gees, disco, crappy 70s like stuff like Neil Diamond. And but then she would, she'd play Curtis Mayfield records, and it was like, oh, this is funk music, this is soul, like this is really deep kind of things happening here. And so when hip hop to me was like, oh, this music is using snippets of the records that my mom has. Okay, I see how this works. So that was such a natural progression of, that's my mom's music, This is my music.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of went backwards, where hip hop made me discover punk in a way where, even though the punk records came out, I discovered Dead Kennedys and Bad Brains, their late 70s, early 80s output after like 85, 86. But to me, it was all new sounding music.
Of course. Yeah.
It was stuff, and I knew I was on the right path because it was stuff that my folks really didn't like. So, you know what I mean? So that's how, as a kid, that's how you know, like, you're on the right path here, because mom and dad don't like it, you know.
It's interesting. I was split because my mom was a high school teacher. So when I started listening to Nirvana and Pearl Jam and the Seattle stuff, she was like, at Green Day, she loved Green Day. She was totally into it because then she could talk to her students about it, who were, you know, around my age. But it's interesting with hip hop, and just kind of thought about this. Like, hip hop was that first genre of music where those dudes wore every single one of their influences on their sleeves without trying to hide it. And I kind of look at, like, that makes sense with, like, artists, because they're, you know, like you don't shy away from talking about your influences. And I think that's always a good thing, because I say this to most people, it like gives you a chance to look back and discover new things, like you're talking about with Dead Kennedys and Bad Brains. I mean, I think the best way to create a culture of people that appreciate art is to show them what came before. And, you know, how else can you do that without showing people your influences, or Beastie showing their influences, or, you know, most metal bands looking back at, you know, Black Sabbath, you know, saying like, yeah, that was the first band that I ever banged my head to, or something like that. But
it's, and even with you know, Beastie's License to Ill, it was like none of us knew at the time right away, hearing that record, that they were sampling Led Zeppelin and John Bonham drum breaks and stuff. We just thought it was super badass sounding stuff. And it wasn't after the fact that I heard one of my friend's older brothers playing Led Zeppelin in the garage while he's working on his car, that I was like, that's from Beastie Boys, like that. And, you know, so there's this lineage, and that's how it works with comics and art and music, is like, there's this great lineage and history of things, like you mentioned. And the other cool thing is, like, when you discover your favorite artist, like Bill Sienkiewicz, for example, is one of my favorite artists. Well, who is Bill's favorite artist? You know, and then you realize, oh, Bill was influenced by this guy, Bob Peak, you know, and a little bit of Ralph Steadman, and a little bit. And so once you start really going back, then you get the full picture of inspiration. And that makes you hopefully more better and more educated on spheres of influence and how it can reflect on your art in a positive way.
Yeah. And it gives you more. And then there's the piece of it too, from a reader and a consumer of this stuff standpoint. It's like, oh, I like all this stuff now that I didn't like last year. And then it just grows wider and wider. And then your mind becomes more open to these things. I mean, it's kind of like drugs. I mean, it really is. It's just like your mind becomes a little more open every time you try something new.
Yes.
And, you know, you just don't want to overdo it.
Yeah. Everything in moderation.
So you moved to KC when you're 18, and is that where kind of your path to comics career starts?
Yeah, you know, it's weird. I actually in high school, when I was still in St. Louis, I started working part-time for a local St. Louis comic book publisher called Artline Studios. And it was just these two guys, this guy Lorenzo from New York and this guy Ed from Illinois, who were self-publishing their own comic books, black and white. This is like 1990, 91. And they saw my work and my sketchbooks, and Lorenzo was like, you're pretty good at inking. Like, would you want to take a stab at starting to ink like backgrounds and stuff for me? So those guys took me under their wing when I was like 15, 16. And this was pre-internet, man. So I didn't know that comics were drawn on 11 by 17 paper, for example. I didn't know what a T-square was. I didn't know what exact brushes people use for inking. So these guys actually showed me all the tools for proper comics making. And so I kind of got my feet wet working with them a bit.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I got to college, there was a dude in illustration 2 years ahead of me, Mike Huddleston, who I immediately met and latched on to because he was like the best guy in the illustration department. And Mike was cool enough that I just sort of like forced a friendship onto him. I'm like, we're going to be friends. Like, I have to learn from you. I have to study from you. You're the baddest dude in this school. Like, I have to soak up everything that is going on here. And he was cool enough and patient enough with me to be like, okay, we'll see. But the other crazy thing, man, is as soon as I saw his like CD collection and I went to his spot, we were kindred spirits because we had all the same albums. He was into hip hop and punk and all the stuff we're talking about, and had all my favorite comic books and graphic novels. And so it was an immediate like shared interest. This was meant to be. And by mid-semester freshman year, my experience in college, I was inking Mike's pencils. Wow. So he was self-publishing a book called Wireless, and we became a penciler inker team. So, but meeting him sort of changed the course of everything for me, because the school itself was good, but like meeting Mike was like, oh, this is where the real education's coming from. Like this dude, and then also 2 doors down from me in the dorms, freshman year, a dude my age was Nathan Fox, who is a brilliant illustrator who does Weatherman at Image Comics and teaches at SVA in New York. Nathan's total badass. So when I met Nathan as well and saw his work, he was another guy that we all just basically became the comics making crew in our school.
And that's its own kind of scene in a way. I mean, and you started, it's 40 Ounce Studios? Is that with Mike?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Mike actually had the 40 Ounce Comics name, and then I sort of co-opted that name and stole it from him, and he, with his blessing. And then I started self-publishing Girl Scouts in 1995 with that 40 Ounce banner on it. And Mike and I were trying to get work as a penciler inker team. Right. We got a couple published things. We got like in 1995, we got a Legion of Superheroes short story in a book DC was putting out called Showcase 95. Okay. And it's very 1995, dude, because Lobo's on the cover.
Yep.
Bo Smith wrote a short story for us, and Mike and I got something into DC Comics, man, when we were, I mean, I was like in 95, I was 20.
Wow.
So, you know, that was kind of a big deal. For publishing. And then, long story short, Mike wound up getting hired by DC to become the monthly penciler of Deathstroke the Terminator. And the editor on that book decided not to use me as his inker. And they put a totally hack, horrible inker on him. And he was doing the monthly work, making the money, but the comps of the books would show up at our apartment once a month. And Mike would just take that box and throw it directly in the trash. Oh. It was so sad, dude. Like the inker was terrible.
Just ruined it. Oh. And
was like, he was drawing these detailed, crazy backgrounds, and the inker would just like black them out, like silhouette them out. It was crazy. And so that put a fire under my ass where I was like, if this is how corporate comics work, if this is how Marvel and DC work, and they're not going to let me ink my homie, I'm going the complete indie route, and I'm going to write and draw all my own shit, letter it, design it, do everything. And I went down the total indie road. And then ironically, that's what got me discovered and got me my solo professional work, which was Generation X Underground Special that Dave is conveniently holding right now.
I've been known to be one of these people that if somebody names a book or something, I have it. It's here.
That's awesome. Great timing.
Here's the thing, though. This is 97, right? Which I know you spent 2 years working on this. The Jubilee the one-page story, Cooking with Jubilee, does that get made before this or during?
Before that.
Before this. Okay.
Yeah. So the time of all this is weird because I got the Gen X gig because I went to a comic book show in 96 in St. Louis. I met Scott Lobdell, who was writing Generation X at the time at Marvel. Mm-hmm. He sees my self-published books, Girl Scouts and this other book, Cosmic Toast. Yes. And he's like, oh, damn, this is awesome. We should do a Gen X project together. He goes back to New York, shows my work to an editor in the Marvel offices, Jason Liebig. Jason decides, Scott's too busy to collaborate. Why don't you just write and draw your own Gen X special? And we'll base it off of this Cosmic Toast book that you did. Like black and white, underground flavor. He's telling me all this on the phone. And I'm just kind of like, all right, this is really going to happen. So the weird thing is I start working on Gen X Underground 96, 97. I graduate in 97 from art school. I moved to Arizona with my girlfriend at the time. I'm still working on Gen X. I go to San Diego Comic-Con that summer. I meet Bob Schreck and Kevin Smith, and I get hired to draw the Clerks book.
Right.
So I finished Gen X, man, and then I immediately go into drawing the Clerks book. And because Marvel was going through bankruptcy and all this crazy turmoil, 96, 97, my Gen X book gets shelved for a while at Marvel. Yeah. So the most ironic thing that happens is the Clerks book actually comes out before Gen X in early 98. And the Clerks book comes out and it's an immediate smash hit. And I go from no one knows my name on the national level in comics to everyone knows my name now because I drew Kevin's first full-length comic book.
And that was at the height of Kevin's like powers.
Yes.
Well, not the, yeah, it was. It really was.
No, you're right because he was the success of Chasing Amy was still in full bloom. Like in 97 when he got to San Diego, Chasing Amy was the talk of the show and he was like red hot, man. And he was starting all this new stuff with Shrek at Oni Press had just formed. Bob was like, we're publishing all of Kevin stuff. You got to come along for this. And I was like, hell yeah, man, let's do it. So it's very, very exciting. Kevin and his producer, Scott Mosier, were super cool guys, really good to me and, you know, let me do my thing. But the crazy thing, man, is Clerks comes out, it's a hit. And then a couple months later, the Gen X Underground book finally comes out. So I started my pro career with this 1-2 punch of no one knows who I am. And now suddenly I've got the Clerks book. And then people are like, wait a minute. Okay, now this kid is writing and drawing his own X-Men special? Like what? Who is this kid? So it was such a dramatic way to start a freelance career and a career in comics. It wasn't planned. It was like the best happy accident that could have happened to a young artist ever for my money. It was because dude, things like just took off from there. Like I never had to work a day job again. Like it was just, that was the beginning of my art career, period.
Yeah. That's amazing. And it's funny because like, you know, you talk about this, how was it received? Because I graduated high school probably the year this came out. So I was on like a 4-year break from reading comics, especially because, you know, after the Image era burned all of us, I was like, I'm just done for now. But how is this? Was this mixed or was it like, were there a lot of people that were just like, what is this?
I got a lot of, what the hell is this from people? But from my circle of indie friends and people that were buying the Oni stuff and the Clerks book, I mean, everyone from that circle loved it. I have no idea what your average Wednesday Warrior Marvel reader thought of it. But for me, man, I was in such a bubble at the time that I was on cloud nine, and I was still basically poor in a way. So I didn't have a computer. So I didn't even have the internet to know if people were talking about it on message boards. I mean, even 98 is like early for message boards and stuff. So I just had my local comic shop in Arizona, and all of them told me that I was awesome. So I was just basking in the glory of like, well, my local comic shop likes me, and
that's all you
friends really like the book. So, but yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Image thing, because not only was Marvel going through chaos and bankruptcy, and my buddy Jason Liebig kind of slipped this through editorial at Marvel and got the Gen X book published, but we were also in a tailspin of the comics implosion of the early 90s. The speculator stuff all went bust. And in 95, 96, when Mike and I were trying to break into comics, every editor we showed our work to would say, your work's really good, but there might not be a comics industry next year. So it was such a strange time. And it's funny because, like, whenever I hear people talking doom and gloom about comics and the state of the art in any era, any year, I'm old enough to be like, yeah, I've been hearing that since like 95. So
and the older dudes are like, oh, I've been hearing that since 77, you know, or whatever.
Yeah, it's one of those funny things of just like, well, sales will go up and down, trends will go up and down, but I think there's always going to be a niche group of people that want to write and draw comic books, and a niche group of people that want to buy them and buy the original art and get commissions. And is it as big of a scene as like video games? No, but it's our scene, man. I mean, that's what makes it special, you know?
And with that said too, and I was thinking about this morning, you know, there's been so many periods in our lives and then before us where, you know, the death of the comics industry birthed it had a rebirth, you know, out of the ashes of the pre-code and the comics code comes the Marvel universe. You know, the DC implosion leads way to Marvel doing a lot of stuff after it. The death of it in the 90s leads way. I mean, we can just say that this is a footnote in the history of the rebirth of Marvel, because a couple years after this, you get the Quesada era, you get Bendis, you get Miller, you get all this talent coming in, and the weirdest shit that Marvel and DC has ever done is in that like 2000 to 2007. I mean, I was looking at the Strange Tales hardcover, which was one of the coolest things that Marvel ever did in the early aughts. The Bizarro World anthology that DC did in the early aughts. Like, I'm all for the comics industry dying and rebirthing very soon just to get some of this kind of interesting stuff back in print.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, you're right. It was funny when Bendis got successful at Marvel because he was sort of able to open the floodgates of, I'll keep writing my superhero stuff for you guys, but then with like Ultimate Marvel Team Up, I'm going to let all these indie weirdos in to draw all these individual issues. And then suddenly like Axel Alonso was calling me to draw various, like, can you do 2-issue fill-in of Peter Parker Spider-Man? Can you do an issue of Tangled Web Spider-Man?
Yeah, Tangled Web was so good.
And it was just a cool time, man, of the editors were willing to experiment and try new things.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, and we can look at the symbiotic relationship of the music industry doing the same thing. The hair metal gave way to to the Seattle scene, which gave way, like, and at that same time, you could look at hip hop and be like, the 90s come to a close, Tupac and Biggie and the death of both of them gave way to new artists coming up. And then, just these weird things like, I mean, this is totally two different types of things, but Joe Quesada starts off as this superstar artist and becomes the editor-in-chief in Marvel. And he also is integral in like the movies portion of it getting a little bit pushed. Dr. Dre goes from being Dr. Dre to fucking a billionaire,
right?
And reinventing Apple Music stuff and beats and all this. It's like, who would have called those two things? Nobody.
I know. And I think Kirkman is a good example of that too, because I met Robert at a convention when he was still doing Battle Pope. He was just a fellow indie creator, nice guy, seemed like a good businessman, hustler like the rest of us. And then Walking Dead, man. I mean, one of the most popular and successful IPs ever, maybe. I don't know if that's correct to say that, but it seems like
it is. I think it is.
It just when the global takeover of that, when it was the biggest show ever, and I mean the number of trades that he's probably sold through Image of that series, it's like who knows what those numbers are, but
it's staggering. It's staggering. Did you? So he's a Missouri guy, right?
He no, he's I believe he is a Lexington, Kentucky guy.
Kentucky. Okay. All right. So a bit further away from you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he I've got one of my really good buddies, my buddy Justin Stewart, who's colored a lot of my work in the past and done lettering and design for me. He's from Lexington, Kentucky, and I think knows Robert from like the pre Walking Dead success era. So it's fun, man. I mean, comics is obviously a very small community, so it's interesting to see people through different phases of career and success.
Oh yeah, we get, and you get to see them how they change the crowds they get at conventions, the lines that they have, and but Robert is one of the reasons why I got into certain books in the early 2000s too. I mean, I read Walking Dead, but Invincible really sealed the deal for me. I think it's the best superhero comic ever created. But
nice.
Yeah. And artist wise, I think Otley was one of those guys that once I saw him, I was just like, whoa, somebody new and fresh doing a superhero book. I was like, wow, this is something. Yeah.
Otley's no joke, dude. He's super dope. He is awesome.
Yeah, he is. So with the Kevin Smith thing, you had so the Clerks book, that gives away you have a cameo in Dogma. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it in a number of years. It's probably been about a decade, but how did that come about?
So Kevin was shooting Dogma in Pittsburgh and invited the whole Oni press gang to show up on set and have a cameo. And it was also the same week we showed up in Pittsburgh, we all did the big Pittsburgh Comic-Con. So they scheduled Kevin as like the guest of honor. And I signed with Kevin. And then Kevin also signed with Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti.
Right.
But dude, it was awesome because I went out to Pittsburgh with Bob Schreck, the co-owner of Oni Press, Joe Nosmak, the other owner, Bob Chapman, owner of Graffiti Designs, who produced all of Kevin's merchandise for many years. Mike Allred joined us, and who else was with us? A couple other people. But in that church, so in Dogma, when you start the movie, if anybody wants to see us, the very first scene that Linda Fiorentino, the main character, is in, it's a church scene, and the camera is panning down the aisle. Everyone in those aisles is a different comic person. So you see Joe Nosmak, you see Bob Chapman, you see Mike Allred, and the camera stops at Linda Fiorentino, and Bob Schreck and I are sitting directly behind her.
Well, there we go.
So we were on set for like, every day for a week. Our scene only took one day to film, but we were just hanging out on set because it was the end sequence of the movie and all the actors were there. So it was Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Alan Rickman, Salma Hayek, Linda Fiorentino, Chris Rock. They were all just hanging out.
That's amazing.
So I was just kicking it, sitting on the curb, like drawing in my sketchbook all day. And then like Chris Rock would come and sit down next to me and be like, "What are you doing, dude?" It was, everyone was cool. Everyone was friendly. And then we ended the week with us doing this, the big Pittsburgh convention. But for me, man, being a young guy in my early 20s, like having all those kind of things happening, and then like these like rock star things were starting to happen, like that was a super badass time.
You can't even imagine as a kid, like, oh, this is going to be something I'll be doing, and being around all this. Like, I can imagine it's like a shock to the system, but a good way. In a
definitely way. Yeah. And Kevin's fans were so cool and fanatical, but like in a good way. Like they were all like, him being from Jersey, it's like there's like this down home vibe to him and his crew where they all just reminded me of like the guys I hung out with in high school. So
because that's pretty much who he, with Clerks, it was just his buddies from college and the buddies that he grew up with that just shot this bullshit movie that was one of the most influential and funniest movies. My cousin I grew up in New York, but my cousin lived in Jersey, and he knew Kevin, knew of him, and he took me to see the movie at the Red Bank movie theater.
Wow.
And I was like, what did that come out? 93. So I was 14 and I'm just like, I probably shouldn't be seeing this movie this young, but hell yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the first time I had heard of you, I go to Half Price Books in Seattle when it was still there in the University District. And I would just, because it's in the University District, I would just pick out random zines. I've always been into like the self-published, the stuff that's not a regular comic. And I must have picked up, it was either Cosmic or it was Girl Scouts, but I instantaneously was like, oh, this art style is cool. It's different. And I think I knew without knowing that you were looking at a lot of Jamie Hewlett. And then obviously you started doing Tank Girl stuff, but what do you remember? Did you see the movie first in 95 or did somebody give you the comics when you were younger? Like, how did you discover Tank Girl?
It was the comics first. I saw the Dark Horse reprints in the comic shop and I didn't take the time to check it out. But then in 93, when I got to art school, my friend Mary Kay, who was hanging out with Mike Huddleston, she had the first Dark Horse trade paperback of all the Tank Girl stuff from Deadline magazine. And she handed that to me, let me borrow it. And then that was like, such a huge lightning bolt through the brain type moment of like reading it and really absorbing Hewlett's art. That to me was like, okay, this is the exact comics that I want to make. Yeah. And more importantly, I was like, I think I can make these type of comics. Like these guys, Hewlett and Martin, seem like they're having a lot of fun. It seems like a big FU to like the system and the establishment. It's very punk. It's very rock and roll. It's sexy. It's irrelevant. Jamie's art style is super fresh, but I feel like it's not unattainable.
Right.
So, I mean, I blatantly started like stealing from those Tank Girl books of like background gags and having a suggested music soundtrack in your book. And giving nods to things that I liked with like characters wearing T-shirts that said like, Fishbone or whatever. and a lot of that I can, I wouldn't have admitted it back then, but now I'm like, so much of that was just stolen from Tank Girl and Hewlett. So, sure. But what a, in my defense, it's like, what a legit source to steal from. Cause to me, he's still all these years later, he's still in my top 5 easily of all time. Like that guy is the man. Jamie Hewlett is the shit. you know.
Well, and he's, his art's, it's funny because like he's so he gives off the air of cool. Like he's just a cool guy who doesn't really give a fuck. And the comics kind of reflected that. I mean, narratively, there's not the story of Tank Girl isn't the cool thing. It's like they just went loose. They were just like, whatever the fuck it's gonna be, that's what it's gonna be. And it is a very specific style that you don't see it. You don't see it that much after, like you said, the background jokes, the punk aesthetic of it. I bet that scene was one hell of a scene to be a part of in the early 80s and in the UK with all those guys. The amount of talent just between like a very small Bollins and Hewlett and Martin and like all these guys, Steve Dillon, right? No, not Dillon. Who am I thinking of? No, Steve Dillon. Yeah. All these guys that just seemingly all hung out together and bounced stuff off. Dave Gibbons. Can't forget about Dave Gibbons also.
Philip Bond was in that crew.
Yeah.
Damn, who else? I mean, there's so many to name. Mike, what's his last name? Mike McNiven, is that right? Or
Mike McMahon.
McMahon, yes. Yeah. I'm thinking of Steve McNiven.
McNiven and Mike McMahon.
Mike McMahon is incredible. But yeah, there's all those
McCarthy,
British chaps that are just all badass and rooted in like that Deadline magazine kind of era, which I was able to find a couple issues of Deadline when I was in college at like Tower Records or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so you could actually see like Tank Girl printed that way in its original form. Yeah. And I think she worked really well in just those short bursts, like a short story format, because it's kind of like what you said, like Hewlett and Martin, if they just felt like, well, this is just what we're going to do for 5 pages in this issue. It's this type of story. We don't give a shit. Here it is. But the art is so great and the humor is so twisted and weird that it's the best thing in the magazine every issue.
Yeah, because a character can die in the next issue. That character's still alive. It didn't really matter. It's kind of like Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. It's just like whatever happens in those 7 minutes of that cartoon have nothing to do with any of the other ones that come before it or after.
Right.
So you're I like, you're a mad scientist with your tools. When did you start kind of experimenting with like all of these different methods that you use? Spray paint and just all these different things. Like, was that just like every couple of years you're just like, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in art school, we were required to start using different medium in like figure drawing classes. So like charcoal only or dip pen ink style only, and also in college, I had illusions of becoming like a graffiti writer. So that's when I started messing around with spray paint. I was never good with it, but the fact that I was able to pick up spray paint and kind of incorporate that into my mixed media work later on, that kind of started in that college era. When I was in Arizona, I started painting live at nightclubs. Yeah. So setting up big 4-foot tall canvases behind DJs on stage. And that exposed me to the idea of like using, paint, acrylics, big fat graffiti markers, oil stick. So that was introducing this mixed media stuff into my work. And then really when I moved to LA after Arizona, I started hanging out with guys like Jason Sean Alexander, who is not only an incredible comic book artist, but he's a straight up like fine art oil painter. So I was going to his studio, man, and like collaborating with him. And then suddenly it's like oil paints, gouache, acrylic, charcoal, we both got into using the Pilot parallel pen, the calligraphy pen that gives you that like scratchy Bill Sienkiewicz looking line. So for me, it was always the good thing about having a style that is able to change and adapt over the years, which is basically what I have. The good thing about that is you can always introduce new media and new tools and new experimentation, and it doesn't detract from what you're doing. It actually aids the evolution of it. Whereas if you're like a straight up super popular fanboy artist in comics, you sort of have to maintain the same look for your work most of the time, which means you're probably going to be using the same tools most of the time. So, and that's fine. That's one way of working as a professional artist. I'm not knocking that. But for me, I've always had this excuse of like, well, if you don't like my work now, just wait for like 5 years because it'll probably look slightly different or very different, because I'm always kind of trying to push things and try new things. And to me, that's just out of necessity so that I don't get bored with my own work.
Yeah, that makes total sense in every facet of like trying to always be better than what you were last week, is to not get bored. And boredom just brings, the same thing over and over. And, some of your influences, obviously, I've heard you talk about them, Sienkiewicz. I mean, the guy's he's a wizard. I've heard you say that before. He really is. Ralph Steadman, another wizard. Were you ever, but one person, he's somebody that I don't know if you were ever looking at, but Dave McKean also kind of, I see some McKean in your works.
Oh yeah. No, I love McKean.
Yeah. He's another wizard. I don't get it. I don't understand how it's done.
And he is brilliant. And I love all of his work, his mixed media work, but I have a huge affinity for just his straight up ink work, like in the comic book series that he wrote and drew, Cages. Check that out if you haven't seen it. It's just this lush, gorgeous black line work. Yeah. And with just like one color added to it. And it's him writing and drawing this kind of slice of life, fantastical fantasy story almost about an artist as a protagonist. But man, the McKean and Sienkiewicz and like Kent Williams and George Pratt, who was at OAX, those guys that lean more toward the fine art mixed media, that have the shaky kind of like unpredictable line in their work. I love all that, obviously. I mean, you can see it in my stuff. So
I mean, as a kid, and I was, not an art student, whatever, but I didn't understand it. And then it was McKean. It was reading Sandman and seeing those covers is what I always knew Sienkiewicz and, Kent Williams also, because he did the Wolverine Havoc series with Muth. I guess it was Kent Williams and Muth. Yep. It didn't quite register in me as a young person, but Sienkiewicz, my God, that man, I know. And I'm going to lead you into the story because I want people to hear the story about the night you got to paint with him. But that man's prolific in a way that I don't think Kirby's the only person I can think of that really has laid down a body of work that you could spend 70 years looking through every comic book and you're going to discover something new from Kirby or new from Sienkiewicz, every single day. But you ended up painting with him one night. It was a fundraiser or something.
Yeah. I met Bill probably at San Diego through Jason Shawn and Kent Williams. And he was always just a super friendly guy.
Yeah.
So Bill eventually moved to LA and I started running into him. We were doing like figure drawing. We would hire a model and hang out at my buddy Alan's place. Alan is this guy, Alan Amato, famous photographer, shot all of Kevin Smith's promo stuff for Smodcast. And Alan would bring together all these misfit artists and we would do figure drawing. And I would always make a point of like sitting next to Bill. Like people were too scared to sit next to him. And I would just sit right next to him because I wanted to see what he was doing. And I wanted to like absorb what energy or magic he had. So we eventually got to the point where we were friends, we were friendly. And then he contacted Jason Shawn, Alexander, and I to do live painting at a Bernie Sanders fundraiser event. And this was before the election of 2016.
Right.
So we did this live art event at Meltdown Comics on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood.
Meltdown.
And dude, that was my old neighborhood. I could walk to Meltdown. So I lived just 3 blocks down the street. So Jason and I, of course, said yes. And we wound up doing this big, huge canvas piece with Bill live in the comic shop. It's live streamed. There's a huge crowd of people in the shop watching us paint. We've got music blasting. And Bill is the magic sorcerer, where I'm painting, but I'm also trying to look over, because there's points of his like working process where everyone's just like hanging on with bated breath of like, what's he going to do next? You know, because he would like, I've told the story before, but he had this, we were doing political figures. So he was painting an unflattering portrait of Hillary Clinton. And I was painting a fucked up thing of Trump. And at one point, Bill had this perfectly rendered Hillary face. Huge, huge painting. And it looks like something out of an Electra Assassin or something. And he takes this green paint and just like paints over the face. And then, you know, everybody gasps in horror watching. There's like, what is he doing? You know, and I'm trying to look at what he's doing. And then I look over again, and he's got this rag with a magical chemical in it, like probably bleach or ammonia or something. And he's dabbing out like all the highlights, and suddenly the green is sort of disappearing. And then I look over again, and it's back to this perfectly rendered Hillary face. So with a slight haze of green in it, you know? So it's like this guy, and there was, you know, big time artists like Mike Huddleston was there. There was all these people that were there that after the event was over, all these artists were sitting around like, okay, you and Jason, you did great tonight. We see what you're doing. Sienkiewicz is just an alien from outer space. There's no method to his madness. His process, there's things that he's doing that we had no idea what he was doing. We had no idea how he was pulling this stuff out of his ass and then destroying parts of it and then saving it and resurrecting things that he had done, and then using some aerosol on a certain part of it. So, but dude, just to have the experience, like, of just standing next to him, actually made me paint better. It really did have this influence on me of like, the Sienkiewicz magic is like in the air, and suddenly I'm painting.
Yeah, you're trying to get it to the next level because you're looking over there, and it's Gandalf, and he's and all of a sudden, right? Yeah, I can't. I mean, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like if comic books was more of a respected medium through the history of comics, his name would be up there with people that we talk about that are painters from the 15th century and shit like that. And maybe in 300 years the Sienkiewicz method will be a thing, which is no method, but I just love the fact that we get to live in the same timeline as him.
Me too, man. It has been an honor and a privilege to even call him a friend, or even I contacted him and asked him for a quote for my last Girl Scouts comic book series. And within 2 days, he had hit me back and sent me a beautiful quote about me and my work. And it's just, those are the full circle moments of like, man, I remember seeing Electra Assassin as a kid and flipping out. And now I'm getting a quote from this guy, like, and he's super nice to me. It's just, it's been a really, all of that like makes the whole experience so worthwhile. It's awesome.
Strange. Yeah, life is strange. One thing I really am curious about, and I never, I know you did it at Emerald City Comic Con a couple of times, and I guess never went to any of the events, but you do a lot of live painting. You have, and you still do. Mm-hmm. How do you get used to that kind of situation? Like that takes some balls, and I know, you mix it with music, I know your brother's a DJ and all that, but how does that start? Like, you're like, all right, I'm going to try this. And then you get better and better at it. But did you get stage fright at the beginning? You know, is it?
Yeah. So I started doing that in Arizona, and it's funny because this guy Z Trip, who's a very famous DJ, he DJs for LL Cool J now. Him and two of his buddies had the #1 like club night in Arizona, and they were all comic book fans, and we met, and they invited me to come down to their club and rock on stage every Thursday night. And since I was new to town, this was really one of my main ways of just meeting new people and making new friends. It just so happened that it was like, well, I'm also going to be painting in front of a room of like 300 strangers. But the fact that no one really knew me kind of made it easier. But also, we were all in our early 20s and everyone was drinking extremely heavily during this era. So getting on stage and getting a buzz immediately and then cutting loose and painting, that added to like the fearlessness of like, just go for it. And if you screw this up, you just paint over it and try again. Like, I feel like the stakes weren't super high because I wasn't trying to like sell these paintings for $1,000 or anything like that. You know, at the end of the night, these were just matte. This was just like matte board tacked onto a big sheet of plywood. And I would take the matte board home and rework the pieces or repaint them or whatever. So it wasn't the work, but that mattered to me. It was the actual experience. And just when I got off stage, man, and went to the bar, I now had a way to talk to people. Yeah. Because people would come to me and be like, dude, saw you up there rocking. That's cool. Can I buy you a beer? Or maybe I would meet girls this way, or, you know what I mean? So it became this instant kind of like icebreaker kind of thing for me to engage in. And then Scott Morse and I, my buddy, who works at Pixar now, we started doing these events in like 99, 2000 at San Diego Comic-Con, where we would host official, you know, after-con parties and rent out a club in downtown San Diego, get our San Diego DJ friends to play records, and then get the Comic-Con crowd to show up and cut loose after a day of being at the convention. And it's like, let's hang out in a dark club, let's dance, let's listen to loud music, and here's some of your favorite artists on stage. And eventually we got guys like David Mack and Ben Templesmith and Huddleston and different people. Ashley Wood joined us one year in 2007. So eventually we started getting like all-star crews of professional artists that would say, I'll give it a try. You know, like what the hell? You know, I've been at the show all day sitting and drawing this little thing. Why not have a couple drinks and cut loose on like a big canvas and just have fun? And also, again, if the piece doesn't work, like, who cares? Just have fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, it only doesn't work to the artist. Anybody that's watching is going to be like, oh, that's fucking great, because we're watching. We're not the ones up there doing everything. So it is very I'd love to watch that one day. And just, you know, when I used to go to cons, the last thing I wanted to do was just be up another 6 hours, you know?
Yes. That's the thing now, man, is I've talked to like Sean Crystal and Matteo Scalera and all these badass dudes of like, if we brought back an event like in New York, like a live art thing, is it worth staying up till 2 a.m.? Is it worth, because it's also like, you have to deal with a club owner and a promoter, and then we have to figure out the DJ situation. And so it becomes this whole other job and list of responsibilities of, who's going to organize the event, you know? Because back in the day, man, that was me.
Yeah.
And then that was like a whole other job, but I had such a blast that I didn't care. So I would drive from LA to San Diego and do the event and just bring all the art supplies in my truck and just drive up to the club Friday during the day before I went to the con or whatever, and unload all the gear. The artists show up. We all get drunk. We paint. But then on Sunday, it's my responsibility to go back to the club, pick up all the easels, pick up all the paint. And these days, man, I guess, everybody's much busier.
Yeah.
And everyone's, I guess, older. And it's just, man, I work my own table now at New York, and I'm standing for 9 hours a day in New York.
Yeah,
I don't mind it. That's part of the gig or whatever. But it's at the end of the day, dude. I'm done. I'm toast.
Yeah. I feel you. I mean, when I work a con, when I'm doing a con, I just want to eat and sleep, and that's it. Nothing else. Did you? And correct me if I'm wrong. Did you ever live in New York? Were you ever?
No, but I've been going there every year for so many years that a lot of New Yorkers think that I either lived there at one time or that I'm from there. I think my work gets the biggest reception in New York, I've discovered. Like, my most hardcore fans are on the East Coast, and I get the biggest props out there every year when I'm at New York Comic Con. I think it's like the grittiness of the work, the looseness of it. Like, and Sienkiewicz was kind of telling me this as well. Like, he gets a big reception out there as well, because I think our work ties into some sort of East Coast energy. Or
and you've talked about it, but the 70s, 80s hip hop graffiti scene, it shines through in your work. And so for me, I grew up there. When I see some of your stuff, especially in this book, the Visual Funk book, by the way, pick it up.
Thank you.
Yeah. I remember, like, I'm instantly flashed back as a kid. My parents would take me into the city, and, the early mid 80s to early 90s. I mean, basically everything before 9/11 still was grimy. And subways, the subway tracks, the Long Island expressways, the overpasses, like, I would see that stuff everywhere. And I was always fascinated by it. Also fascinated by the fact that, like, how the fuck did these guys do this stuff without getting caught all the time, And so your work does kind of have that energy, and Sienkiewicz too. It makes total sense. Frank Miller as well.
It's funny because I always entertained the idea of trying to live in New York at some point. And because I do love going out there so much. And during New York Comic Con, me and my crew will always stay like 2 or 3 days after the show so we can enjoy the city and do some shopping and just absorb New York and take the train and go to Brooklyn. But it's one thing to visit and love it, and it's another thing to actually live there. And as you know, I mean, the cost of living now, man, that's one of the reasons I moved out of LA in 2018 is it's like traffic sucks, and the cost of living in California and New York, it's just so noticeably more expensive that I just moved back to the Midwest in September, and like all my bills, all my spending, like it all went down.
Of course.
So it's kind of a rare thing to be able to say in this day and age, but it's like, well, yeah, life is just cheaper here. But that being said, if anyone has a studio space in Brooklyn that it would be awesome to try for like a year. Like I would love to try it for a year or so and just see what happens, but
it would influence your work, I'm sure, in a good way. I mean, I always appreciated growing up in a place that had such a vibrant art scene. And when Tara McPherson and Sean opened up Cotton Candy Machine, that was a haven for me. That's where I met Alex Pardee and Wayshak and Dave Correa and all those, the Zero Friends guys. I would hang out there. Like I was living in Long Island, and I would hang out there on a weekly basis.
How long did that take for you to get there?
Train was about 60 minutes door to door.
Okay, that's not bad.
Yeah, but then I moved to Queens, and everything was, perfect.
Yeah,
but
that crew you just mentioned is like, that's like my extended family outside of comics, like Pardee and Tara and all of them. That's like, when I was living in LA, I started going to art openings every weekend. And that's when I met all of the like juxtapose, lowbrow art type people. And I would see Dave Cho almost every week at Meltdown because he's a comic book nerd. And I'd see him on Wednesdays. And who else? Jordan Crane and like all Sammy Harcum and all these guys that were kind of in comics, but also in the pop art juxtapose.
The Mondo print scene, all that stuff. It was that's such a brilliant era. And rest in peace to Mondo, but like I discovered so much art through, that scene and that era. And, I met a lot of friends too that were just collectors and appreciators as well. Yeah. So, and that's the thing about art scenes. And you seem to have, been involved in a bunch of them, anchoring them. And when you moved to Portland, we talked about it at OAX, but Portland is such a comic city. Like, it's heaven. I try to tell people that it's heaven for comic nerds.
You throw a rock, you're going to hit somebody who works in comics.
Seriously. And you're going to throw a rock, you're going to hit a comic store.
Yes. Yeah. Oh man, that is one thing I do miss is like Cosmic Monkey and
oh my God,
Floating World. My buddy Chris owns a shop called I Like Comics out in Vancouver.
Yeah, Chris is good people.
Washington. Yeah. So I was spoiled, man. I do miss that. Kansas City has a couple good shops, but just Cosmic Monkey alone is pretty much like one-stop shopping. Everything you could possibly want is basically in that one store.
Yeah.
And those guys are cool as shit. And it makes a difference, man, to have the actual brick and mortar place that you can go and hang out in as far as absorbing the art and the comics culture,
Yeah. Yeah. All right, two things. One, and this might actually be the last two questions because I have a feeling you're going to have stuff to say about it. But you're back to the music aspect. I don't know how long ago you started it, but it doesn't look like you continued it, but ran for a while. Skull Funk Radio is these playlists that you came up with, but it's a podcast because you talk also during it.
Yeah.
When did that start? And it's such a brilliant thing. So for anybody listening, It's on Spotify still.
Yeah. So I was always a huge fan of making mixtapes when I was a little kid. And when I started driving, I would make mixtapes that we could bump in my car with me and my friends driving around St. Louis when we were bored. So Skull Funk Radio is basically just me making a 60-minute mixtape and kind of talking in between every 3 or 4 songs just to give a little background. But I made them. There's 60 volumes. They're all free on Spotify. There's also a website, skullfunkradio.fireside.fm if you're not on Spotify. But it's basically just me making free mixtapes and celebrating some of the music in my collection. And it's basically, this is the music that I'm listening to while I'm doing art, while I'm making comics. I had an awesome producer, my buddy Justin, and he moved to LA and got busy, and then I got super busy, and the podcast is basically just on hiatus. I haven't done one in 2 years or so. I would love to bring it back, but the honest truth is like I'm so busy now in a good way. Like,
sure,
things have really kind of picked up the last couple of years as far as like freelance and traveling and conventions and stuff that my time, there's no time, dude. It's weird. It's weird in a good way. I don't know.
I feel you, man. I have a podcast besides this, like an audio podcast, and I have my weekly sale, and I have all this stuff that I'm trying to do, and it's like and I edit everything myself. Podcast, the video, I buy collections. I'm doing everything. But man, it's such an interesting thing because I was thinking about it recently, and it's like you're making these mixtapes and you create art while you're listening to music. I like to listen to music while I'm reading comics or reading in general or packing orders. And I think there's definitely a space that nobody's occupying right now of making playlists to read comics to, or to for specific comics. Like talking about Reznor, I like reading Somna, Becky and Tula's new book, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
I will put on Nine Inch Nails' Ghosts. It's just all instrumental and it's just such a vibe. And I'm like, there's got to be a space where somebody can come in and be like, all right, well, we're gonna have a playlist for all of the Watchmen. And here you go. Read all 12 issues to Watchmen while you're listening to this, Right. I appreciate your love of it. Do you collect records or no?
I have a record collection, but I stopped buying records a couple years ago because I still buy comic books and graphic novels and art books. And at this point, man, it's like just moving recently. 95% of my possessions are paper now, like comics, records, art, my own art, all of my archives of all my stuff, magazines, 4 or 5 bookshelves full of books.
Yeah.
Right behind me.
I can see.
So it got to the point where I was kind of like, I think the record buying stuff has to kind of slow down or sort of end for now because it sucks to say, but like you can just click a button now and get the song you want to hear or the album you want to hear. And with comics and books, man, I want to consume it on paper. I want the physical item in my hand. So I'm not really a digital comics reader. I want the book, and the book, as you know, it takes up physical space. So
it's about 60 short boxes in the room I'm in right now.
Oh, damn. Okay. you beat me. You have me beat. So
I think Ed and Jim might have more comics than me, but yeah, it's a lot.
I think those guys, was it Jim or Ed told me he bought a separate house or something just for his.
Jim has a storage locker for his comics, and they're all in order.
Wow, I love it.
Yeah, I love it too. It's genius. You just had, you've done lots of album art, but I know on Instagram you just unboxed. You had a Fortnite soundtrack is your album art.
Yeah, that was an awesome gig. I've been doing loading screens for the Fortnite video game for the last 3 years. I think I've done maybe 7 or 8 of them at this point. They're awesome to work with. It's Epic Games. They want artists with unique bugged out styles to be in the game. And then my friends have a company in LA called I Am 8-Bit. And 8-Bit specializes in custom releases and promotional product for video games, movie studios when they release something new. So it was just ironic. 8-Bit got the gig with Fortnite to release a limited edition vinyl record of the Fortnite. They call it, it's like the waiting room music, or I think when you're in the game and you're waiting. So 8-Bit was like, well, let's get Jim to do all the art. So, it was like front and back cover of the vinyl sleeve, the double inside spread, and the actual labels that go on the vinyl.
That's dope. So, what a world.
Killer gig, man. And anytime I have an excuse to have my art appear on a record, it's all good with me. My buddy Justin Stewart colored all of it, knocked it out of the park. So getting those in the mail, that was a month or so ago. Those are the kind of gigs that you're like, I'm so lucky, man, that I get to do this shit. This is awesome.
Yeah. And to live in a world where the loading music of a video game is on a soundtrack. I never would have thought of that when I started playing an NES and, as a kid in the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just awesome. the artisanal soundtracks and comic books and all this cool stuff that we have access to now. I mean, as much as people want to talk about, that, things aren't what they used to be. No, but in some aspects, they're so much better.
I know.
When it comes to consuming art, And speaking of art and current comics and stuff, what are you working on right now that you can talk about, or what do you have coming out that you can talk about?
Yeah, I've got some visual aids here.
Ooh.
Girl Scouts Stone Ghost is my latest and greatest creator-owned. There we go.
There you go.
My latest and greatest creator-owned comics. You can get this trade at your local comic shop, or you can order it directly from me, jimmahfood.com, and I will sign it and remark on it for you. And then this is awesome, man. This is I'll show you the cover, but this is at the printer right now. It's called the Ballpoint Slayer.
Ooh.
And this is the cover of my new art book that I'm self-publishing. That is all the best of my ballpoint pen drawings that I've been doing in sketchbooks over the last couple of years. So this will be available hopefully early to mid-March, maybe
and
sooner.
Hardcover?
This is a soft cover.
Soft cover, okay.
Just a soft cover, and the reason I'm doing it that way, it's not like a huge art book, but I want this is volume 1, and I want to do a volume of these like once a year.
And that's the Ballpoint Slayer. So with self-publishing on that, is it going to be just available on your website? Are you going to do a Kickstarter? How are you going to distribute it?
I'm just doing my website on this one, and I'll have it at my booth at all the conventions because I desperately want new material for my convention presence this year. But that being said, going back to the book that you showed, the Visual Funk hardcover, I want to do another big jammy deluxe hardcover art book, and that's something that I'm planning on crowdfunding.
Cool. Yeah,
so
that's the way to go.
That one's going to be like full color, balls to the wall, and Ballpoint Slayer is basically black, and blue line ink drawings.
Yeah.
But it's something that I've been really into the last couple of years, like starting the day with these straight to ballpoint, just freestyle drawings, like really weird, interesting, cool stuff has been coming out of it. So I figured I have so much art in here, man, that I'm like, okay, this year, I need to start scanning all my new stuff and actually getting it into print form for people to digest and consume and enjoy. Because I think you get lost. I get lost in the habit of like, I'm really good about posting my art every day on social media, not even to make money, but just to remind people, hey, I'm a working artist. Here's my art. Maybe you'll dig this. Here it is every day, just a daily dose. But then you forget, like, people are consuming your images at the size of a postage stamp on their phone. And part of me is like, oh, wait, no, you have to print this and physically manifest it so that people can. I like holding the art in my hands. I just said that a minute ago. I got to make stuff that people can hold in their hands and enjoy, and it's not on their phone, Right. So that's a goal of mine. And I think I'm starting the year off right because I've got like my first self-published art book dropping sooner than later.
No, that's great. When I look at, somebody's art on Instagram or whatever, it's just like, is that available for sale? Can I buy that?
Yeah.
Are you posting that to tempt me?
You're an art collector though.
Yeah.
It's funny, man, because I think that some people, maybe even young people, young consumers, they don't even know that buying original art is an option.
I know. Because it's very interesting. I bought some stuff earlier on, early 2000s. I'm an asshole. I had a Tradmore page and I sold it. I sold a couple of pages that I had, and I was just upset at myself years later. But I didn't know how easy it was to just hit somebody up and be like, yo, are you selling that? Or do you have a page from this that's still available? And I think there are some people that just, unless you make people aware of it, they don't know that they can collect original art. And I know you were telling me you're working on getting a new art rep, but you have some variant covers coming soon, including a badass Spider-Punk one.
Yes. Yeah. That's out in late March.
Late March.
So I'm making that available. I have this new thing. I mean, it shouldn't be a new thing because it's this is, I think, the smart way to sell art is you wait till the piece is actually published and then you sell the original to create the hype and demand and to let collectors know this is out. This has officially been published.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had a teaser binder of original art at OEX where I had these are all the covers I have coming out this year, and I'm not selling any of the originals yet. So I've got a Sacrificers cover for Rick Remender, a Jay and Silent Bob cover for Kevin Smith in April, Spider-Punk March, Wes Craig does a book at Image called Kaya. I have a cover for that in April. So there's all this stuff that collectors were like, can I buy this?
Yeah, I'm included.
Not right now, not this weekend, but I'll announce it when you'll know when it's available.
Yeah. And no, that was a good, but it created a buzz. I mean, it created a buzz for me because, I looked at that. I was like, wow, I want that. And I put it on the video. I'm sure other people got to see it and they're like, oh, I would like to own that too, Yeah. So
thank you for the hype on the video. I was glad to see I had my own little section in there of so much talent in that room, dude. It was like,
oh my God, it was unbelievable. But that, that's kind of the reason for this channel. I don't make any money from promoting other people's work, but overall, the more that comic creators can be successful, then I get to stick around and keep doing this. I'm not doing this just because, I'm bored. I'm doing this because I fucking love comics.
Yeah.
And, that's what this is all about.
It has to be rooted in that. It has to be.
Right. Well, people can tell soulless, boring content from stuff that has soul. I mean, it's very interesting. And I don't know how aware you are of the shift in kind of the comic community these days and the way people sell books and the way they get talked about. We discussed about that a little bit, but it's very strange how Wizard kind of just helped bring upon the crash by, their own destructive methods. And there's a lot of that going on now with people hyping up books based on what's happening in movies and TV and all this stuff. And I'm just sitting here have you ever picked up and read a comic? Because that's what I'm here for.
Right. Yeah, it's weird, man. It's funny because I don't really see or spend time exploring that side of it, the collector, flipper, CGC side of it. I understand what it is, but
sure.
I guess for me, it's comics were meant to be read and enjoyed. Yeah. So if you have something of value, I understand people wanting it. I played the variant cover game with my last Girl Scout series where issue 1 had all these different variant covers. That's sort of the game that we're stuck with right now. But at the same time, it's weird because a lot of that, I just want good comics. And so a lot of that I think kind of goes over my head of, I don't know what people are talking about sometimes with some of this stuff.
And that might be better off because I see some certain creators getting involved in selling their own stuff. And it's a weird line of I get it, but at the same time, you're doing the same exploiting methods that destroyed comics in a bit. But yeah, I mean, look, I'm not a big CGC guy. I do it because people buy books for me. I don't really like putting my books encased in tomb unless they're 75 years old.
Right.
But I that there's a lot going on these days, but I think like we talked about before, the dark ages of comics brings about this great new creative birth. And, I'd love to see it keep going. Do you have more Girl Scouts on the way or is that over? Okay.
Yeah. I have I did a bunch of exclusive comics online last year for zestworld.com. They were kind of like a Substack online comics thing. That contract is over, and now I'm working on doing a print version of all that material sometime this year. So I'm still working out the details of that. So I have that. I've got the Ballpoint Slayer, the art book coming out soon. And then my next big gig is I'm doing a new creator-owned comic book with Scotty Young that will be out probably next year. Definitely not this year. We're just starting it. We're building it and designing the universe. But I've known Scotty for like 20 years, and we've been talking about working together for like 10 years. So we're finally able to do it. And it's going to be cool, man. It's going to be something that people don't expect.
I like Scotty.
Like, that's the last I'll say about it, but it's going to be something really interesting.
Awesome. Well, that will be kick-ass. And can you at least say where the duties are? Who's writing, who's drawing? Is it both?
Yeah, Scotty's scripting it, but we're gonna share a little bit of visuals. I'm predominantly gonna draw most of it, but I'm gonna try and rope him into doing some stuff too. So we'll see.
That'll be great. It's interesting. He rose to fame in my eyes with the variant covers, the baby variant stuff, but go look into his stuff that he was doing with the Cable and Deadpool. And I'm like, this is somebody that was looking at the same stuff you're looking at.
Yeah.
And just drawing some wild shit. And I'm like, can we get Scotty doing that again?
Yeah. We're from the same school for sure. I mean, I think he's like maybe 2 years younger than me, but as far as like music and art and influences and comics, dude, like we're cut from the same cloth for sure. And he lives out here, so I'm able to meet up with him. We get together almost like once a week, and we're able to like, it makes a big difference to be able to be in person with someone and show sketches and share ideas and have that one-on-one communication in person, as opposed to just like, I'm just going to send you some JPEGs of this stuff or whatever, text you some stuff. But we'll have lunch and actually like have the art in front of us and stuff. So
that's cool. Awesome. That'll make for a more natural, just coming together of creativeness, like you said. Before we get going, let me just. Can you give me 3 albums that you can't live without?
Ooh, yeah.
They don't have to be your favorites, just 3 albums that you can't live without.
I feel like this changes from year to year.
Of course.
I would say the Stooges, either their first self-titled or maybe Raw Power, because me, it represents the quintessential energy of what rock and roll music is.
Yeah.
Like if aliens landed and we're like, what's rock and roll? I would probably be like, this is it. Some people would say the Beatles. It's like, well, no, the Beatles are incredible. They're brilliant songwriters. The Stooges represent the sweat and swagger and attitude of what rock and roll is. They are rock and roll.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Iggy's an alien.
Yeah. He's the man. On the hip hop tip, I would probably go right now today with Madlib and MF Doom's Mad Villainy. Just because I think it's the perfect collaboration in music of producer and MC, and both those guys are at the absolute peak of their skill level on that record.
Right.
It's a 10 out of 10. It's a perfect record. You don't even have to be into hip hop, I don't think, to enjoy it. It's just unbelievable. And shit, what else? I almost want to mention something like a jazz or I'll just say I'll go with like Herbie Hancock Headhunters, because it's the evolution of jazz filtered into 70s electronic funk and outer space weirdness and magic. So it's jazz, but it to a funkified beat that you can actually dance to the record. And when I heard that in college, that was a game changer for me, where I was like, wait, what's going on here? Okay. And there's only 4 songs on the record. I mean, each song is like 15 minutes long or whatever. But they're just these monstrous jams of experimentation and rhythm, and you can't beat it. So as of today, those would be my 3. But if you ask me next week, it would probably be 3 different records.
I mean, but that's the beautiful thing about music. It's just like whatever you're feeling that day, that week, that month, that's what you're gonna pick out. I mean, it's a little bit tougher with movies and books, at least in my eyes. But with music, it's just what you're feeling that month. I'll have to check out the Herbie Hancock album because I'm not familiar with that one. But like you said, I have it at the at my fingertips. I can just put it on right after we're done.
Have it in 1 second. And it's also if you're doing, it's all instrumental. So if you're doing busy work, or like, I love to have it on when I'm writing or doing layouts, because I can have it on a low volume and I'm still enjoying it, but it's not interrupting the flow of my thought process at all.
Yeah.
Whereas once you put on something with lyrics, it's like, oh, this might be competing with whatever else you have going on.
Yeah.
So different records for different phases of my work schedule during the day is how I play it.
That's awesome though. I mean, there's something about music that I love talking to people about music when it comes to their creative process. It's always fascinated me. And I love talking to musicians about their creative process too, because they're always trying to do something different to trigger something inside themselves to create something that they haven't done before. And, I always think that, like, when you're talking to somebody about creativity, it's endless. It's endless because, I mean, I think of a guy like, when we talk about comics, I think of a guy like Neil Gaiman. How deep is the universe in his head that he is still able to create things that fascinate us year after year after year? And you're never like, that's kind of like the thing he did before. It's like, no, how the fuck did the guy who wrote American Gods come up with Coraline? Come up with Sandman? Like, he's an alien too.
Yeah,
that's all I can think of.
Certain creatives, I think, just have that limitless well inside them of being able to just reach deep and reach in and grab something different each time. And the other challenge, especially if you do this as a career, is like, how do you stay motivated and inspired to make new, exciting work and also fulfill the need of, this is how you make a living. You need to get paid. Yeah. You need a paycheck. Yeah. You need to deliver. You need to make deadlines. So it's this really interesting, delicate balance of having art in your life and having it maybe as a hobby is great. That's one thing. But then when you take the chance and the move to make this a career, being creative, that's a whole other set of rules, man. That's a whole other like way of living and lifestyle. And I've had to tell young artists, like, some creatives might not be cut out to actually do it as a full-time job. Like, some people were maybe just meant to have it as a hobby or part-time, or because doing it every day of the year after year as your main source of income, it's a tricky, challenging thing.
It's exhausting.
Yes. But it can be, but it can be, when it works out, it's so great. And like, I feel relieved because this is my 27th year of doing it as a career, and I still get up every day, man, and am excited to get into the studio. Like, I'm still jazzed to get at the drawing table, and I'm like, holy shit, thank God that feeling hasn't gone away yet. Like, I'm lucky. Like, when I take a break and go, like when I went and did OAX, and we took Monday off and went to Disney World, and but Tuesday when I got to the airport in Orlando, I was like, man, Wednesday morning, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to have some breakfast, and I'm hitting the studio, dude. And I'm going to like jam for 8 hours straight. I feel inspired. I talk to a bunch of cool people. I talk to my fellow artist homies. I'm feeling great. I know what I need to do. And that's like basically the best case scenario you can be in. So I'm lucky.
Thank you for vocalizing something that I've heard myself say, and I've heard friends say, but 27 years, that's nothing to scoff at. So congratulations for maintaining this amazing career. But yeah, the reset button and waking up the next day and being ready to go and like working at it, like it's such an affirming thing. And then the post OAX feeling, I'm like pushing the burnout right now, but today was the day where I'm like, cool, I get to relax and talk to somebody. But yeah, the day, like when I left OAX and I went to my parents and I went home, I was like, yeah, this is great. Met a bunch of people, set up some interviews. Like I get to talk comics. I got a whole bunch of new art. I met Bill Cox, and like I'm gonna try and position myself to be a part of OAX next year. I've got some ideas, but yeah, no, it's a good feeling to have, and like everybody really should. That's in a space where they are their own source of income, their own boss, whatever you want to call it. Always make sure to kind of take that second and just be like, this is awesome. I'm still doing this and I'm still enjoying this.
Yeah, it's like you have to take the time to celebrate it and then know when to get back into it and not let yourself get rusty. It's good to take breaks, but at the same time, I find that like once I'm in that flow, you don't really want to interrupt the flow. So it's cool, man. Like the rest of February and all of March, I'm not really traveling at all for any shows. I'm just going to be mostly in the studio. Next month in March, I've got Kansas City Planet Comic-Con, which I just drive down the street and I'm there. So I am doing a convention, but the fact that I don't have to travel and stay in a hotel, like I'm here for the next month and a half, just making work. And that's what I need to do right now.
Awesome. Well, it's a bummer because that means you won't be at Emerald City. What other cons do you have on the schedule this year?
I'm talking to Shelton about doing Heroes in June. And then what else? I've got a couple others that are not solidified yet, but definitely New York in October, which I do every year. And there's two others that I'm not going to mention because they're not 100% yet.
Sure. And then obviously you're on Instagram. Oh, yes. There goes the thumbs up. You're on Instagram. Your website is just your name, correct?
Yes. jimmahfood.com for books, prints, mini comics, and such.
You have a somewhat dormant YouTube channel, but people can still follow you there and look at all the videos you used to have on there.
Yes. I've been trying to upload some things lately, but I do have like some drawing videos on there. And it's funny, I just did David Finch's YouTube show last night. So that just went up today. It's me and Dave. I convinced him to do my freestyle ballpoint pen method. And so it's me and him and the guy who hosts his show, Eric,
yeah.
All great guys. We're just jamming for 2 hours straight, talking and drawing in straight pen, sketchbook style. So people can check that out on Dave's YouTube channel.
Yeah. None. Anywhere else you want me to direct people? All the links will be down below for everything. So anything Jim's talking about, it'll be just down there.
Yes. Yeah. And like you said, my social media all under my name, and Instagram is kind of my main hub. It's basically where I do my daily updates, and people can subscribe to my email newsletter on my website as well.
Okay. All right. Well, Jim, thank you for all the time and great conversation. I knew we would have a good one, especially because it's the battle of the beards. So we have to figure out. You know.
Yeah, man, we were chatting at OAX and I was like, oh yeah, me and Dave get along. Like I can talk to you easily on your show. And it's not like a forced situation or anything. It's just easy. We're just hanging out. It's no big deal. So
yeah. And, you know, and so I really appreciate the time. And, once again, thank you again. And, I'll direct everybody to all those sites. But, if you meet Jim at a convention, always remember that you can buy art from him and buy books. So buy stuff, because art doesn't survive without the artist surviving. That doesn't make any sense. Anyway,
you're close. You're close. I mean, you know, good attempts.
Yeah. Good. Wasn't that special? Wasn't that special? Thank you for listening to my interview with Jim, and I will probably be having him back on the program at some point, and we're going to try and collaborate for DaveNdraCon. Look for that. Other than that, please like, subscribe. Nope. Please, just, all right. Well, I blew the end of that one. So anyway, have yourself a great day. Goodbye.
It's completely dark in here now.